you hear me? Yes, you. The current weather warning for the Highlands is you might need your big jumper.
It's pretty much the same over here.
I was looking forward to a winter wonderland of sorts.
All I can see is Alex, looking very German.
Which one?
I have to warn Ewan and Judy right to begin with that usually Alexander Drexel does the intros because I have a reputation of, what's the word? Not managing to get much further than a sentence without messing up.
Deal with it.
Yeah.
Suck it up. You know, everybody's happy. I saved your life. I can go to lunch later.
I'm now going to be professional. I've got my tea. I'm good.
Do it.
I'm psyched.
Kick us off.
Hello and welcome to the 20th episode of Troublesome Terps, the podcast that discusses the topics that keep interpreters up at night, and that probably counts as CPD if you squint hard enough. Today we have an extra special show. For the first time ever in the history of Troublesome Terps, we have not one, but two guests with us.
Woo! Woo!
That was a bit of a delayed woo. Anyway, yeah, that's right. But before we even get there, I'm really pleased to introduce you once again to the winningest interpreting podcaster in history, Alexander Drexel.
Yes, hello, good evening everyone. I'm coming to you loud and clear from beautiful but very, very cold Aachen tonight. The other Alex and I, at least we're in the same country, which is a good start.
Yay!
Yay!
We're almost in the same room.
I always thought Aachen was what a German said when they sneezed.
Gesundheit, Jonathan.
I'm Jonathan Downey, the resident person who tries to be funny. And completing our co-hosting team, we have the master of the short, smart quip, our very own Bavarian sensation, Alexander Gansmeyer.
So am I supposed to say something short, smart, and quippy now? I don't have anything like that. I do apologize. It's too cold. It's too cold. I'm sorry, guys. I need to warm up first.
Welcome to the most professional part of Troublesome Terps.
The introduction.
As I mentioned earlier, we have two guests on the show today. First, we have the co-author of the classic book in translator and interpreter marketing, The Entrepreneurial Linguist. She's a sought-after speaker, experienced interpreter and translator, and as I can testify from meeting her in Budapest, an all-round lovely person, Judy Jenner.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. This is an amazing podcast you have going here, and I'm happy to be part of it.
It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
It's amazing the people we get to come on this show. It makes us feel professional.
It's amazing that people actually listen to the podcast, I find.
Okay,
well, they should.
Okay, that's being cut in post. Can I just say that now? And it is my personal pleasure to welcome one of the most insightful business coaches that I have ever met onto the show. Now, one of the things about Troublesome Terps is that we're trying to widen our scope. Interpreters traditionally have kept themselves and listened to their own people. But personally, I've been impressed by this guy. It takes a certain kind of person to help consultants and solopreneurs double their rates, and who wouldn't like to double their rates. He is the Director of Business Planning, Implementation and Acceleration for Mount Parnassus Limited, and the pricing strategist for his own company, Castle Strategy. And as if enough, he's also a fellow Heriot-Watt University graduate. Please welcome Ewan Menzies.
Jonathan, you're far too kind, and I don't know where you got all that good stuff from. You must have confused me with someone else. Thank you.
I can confuse a lot of people with a lot of things. No, one of the skills of a good interpreter is to be able to do research, and one of our sayings is that we can be a fake expert on anything if you give us a week. So, this is our very special business development show. I think a lot of interpreters are realizing that we have to have a change of mindset from passively waiting for work to come to going out and finding it. And so this is why we have both Ewan and Judy. Judy with her expertise on the industry and where it might be going and what kind of marketing would be helpful, and Ewan with his experience outside the translation and interpreting industry with consultants, solopreneurs and one-person businesses. And we thought it'd be a good idea to bring both perspectives together so that we hear both sides of the coin. So where shall we start? Ewan, can you jump in and give us in a couple of sentences what's the difference between business development and marketing?
Yeah, sure, Jonathan. I don't know what the official difference is between them, but I certainly have my own interpretation of that. So for me, business development is about three things, keeping it really simple. It's about deciding who your dream clients are, what your business model is. But when I say business model, I mean, what are you trying to do as a solopreneur? Are you trying to get 5 clients on £500 a month? Are you trying to get 10 clients on £300 a month? Something really simple. And the third thing is retainers. If you can get clients onto retainers, that's the holy grail. People paying you every single month. And for me, those are the 3 simple things that encapsulate business development.
So that really moves us, because the traditional model for certainly conference interpreting is that it's a per job model. So I don't know about anyone else's experience, but my experience often is you might do a job for a client and the next time you'll hear from them is 12 months time, maybe 24 months time, when they happen to come back round to your city. It's interesting to see that I've actually seen more and more interpreters now look to grow different aspects of their business to try and move clients away from just a per job to offering other services as well. Judy, have you seen that in the US, that interpreters are trying to find ways that they're not just being paid for this job by this client, but they're trying to offer other services, basically to keep them in the funnel, if you like, for longer?
Right. Good question. I think rather than offering additional services in addition to interpreting, I think what should happen and what some of us do is really nurture the relationship. I think all business is about relationship building in one level or another, whatever you call it, marketing or business development or sales. It's all about having a relationship with a client, and they're more likely to come back to you if they feel like you're really trying to have a working relationship with them, except as opposed to just do a project every few months. So what I always recommend is something very simple. Keep in touch, send a Christmas gift, send somebody's having a new baby. Why don't you send some flowers? Check in once in a while. Say, hey, dear company X, I've seen you in the news. Great job on earnings for this quarter, or whatever. Just like you do in your normal human relationships on a personal level, I do that also on the business level. And it doesn't cost you anything other than your time. And it's a powerful tool, because if I were the client, I'll come back to the person with whom I've had contact throughout the year. Sometimes it just comes down to them remembering you, because there's so many great interpreters, and not there's some who are better than others, of course. But I think the people who get remembered are the linguists who really work on the relationships with their clients.
And so is that what you're talking about, Ewan, when you're talking about retainers, is almost creating a longer term financial relationship, that the client's not paying you to do project X, they're paying you to do project X and follow up on other things to do with that project, so that you're kind of hearing from them and if you like, receiving small amounts of funds from them on an ongoing basis?
It's a great point that Judy makes. It is about a relationship, and it's and I'm going to come back to this point later in some other questions I think we're going to tackle. But it is about that relationship. The retainer model, it's about having income that comes in every month, and that can happen in different ways. It could be someone's paying you £1,000 a month for services, or it could be that you've got a strategic partner who sends you 3 or 4 jobs every month. So it's different things, and it's about being creative so that you can build that. And to give you one example, a training company I worked with about 5 or 6 years ago, like yourselves, they were going in, they were doing 2 pieces of work over the year, maybe one in May, one in September, and they were charging about £10,000. And I just said to them, why don't you take the relationship to a new level? Instead of charging them 5,000 and 5,000, let's just charge £1,000 a month throughout the year. And with that relationship that Judy speaks about, occasionally there's other things that crop up and you can just increase that monthly retainer. But it's being creative, seeing opportunities that are going to bring you regular income.
So, Alex Kansmeyer, I know the German market is notorious for having quite a lot of work going. How are interpreters dealing with their clients here and trying to grow their business there? Are they just saying, okay, we'll take the work that comes, or are interpreters looking to try and build these kind of long-term relationships with clients?
That's a very good question, actually. I'm not sure how other folks do it, but I try to build these relationships because I do believe what Judy said, that, people are going to remember the people that they had contact with, the people that sent them an email, gave them a call, and also the people that they liked. And I think if you just ignore someone for 365 days and then you just call them and are like, hey, where's my job from last year? Why aren't we doing this year? I'm not sure that rubs people the right way. So that's kind of what I try to do. But equally, in the whole business development thing, I remember when I was starting out, I was thinking, there were all these different courses and seminars that I did on business development and creating your own business plan, especially when you're starting out. So you have these targets that you can hit and you can see how you're evolving. And I think particularly in our profession, it's very difficult. And it was very frustrating initially because it's hard to set these fixed milestones, these benchmarks for yourself, because in a way we are dependent on external factors that are outside of our control. So over time, I've kind of learned to, how should I say, maybe deconstruct the business plan in a way that is more achievable to me. So instead of saying, I'm going to get 5 new clients every day this week, I kind of flipped that and said, I'm going to contact 5 potential new clients every day this week because that was in my control. Mm-hmm. So I could do that. And at the end of the day, I felt good knowing that I had done what was in my power, what I could do to further my business. Now, how many of those actually turned out clients? I don't know. It's probably not that many, but as it goes, that's just how I try to grow my business. And I'm happy with how it turned out in the long run. So I think that is something very important that I just want to, mention.
I know Ewan has a lot to say in business plans, and I know if I let Ewan go on business plans, we could be here for a while. One of the things that I've noticed myself is that certainly where I am, the part of the UK market that I'm in is traditionally quite agency controlled, and there's nothing particularly wrong with that where the market is strong and where there's a lot of work and while all of the agencies are winning and there's not a huge amount of fierce competition. Once it becomes super competitive, once you end up with a lot of supply and not so much demand, then it becomes a more difficult model. And so since I graduated with my PhD about a year and a half ago, I became consultant very quickly, and I realized that actually for me, the things that are within my control are how many possible decision makers can I reach? And even there, I'm still rejigging a strategy to go where I can't necessarily always be in the same room as them because, as we record this podcast, my part of Scotland is on a red weather alert and they've told everyone to stay at home. So I'm very glad I didn't book tickets to go to the trade show that I was planning to go to tomorrow in London. But by the same token, there are concrete steps that you can be taking. You can be trying to do connection requests on LinkedIn. You can be creating an email course that you can send to clients. Ewan, without going into the deep detail of your views on business plans, do you, when you're advising solopreneurs, do you tend to concentrate on the things that they can control? Or what is it that you set for them instead of I know you're not a fan of traditional numerical targets. Could you talk through what you ask solopreneurs to set up instead of them?
Yeah, I'll try and be as brief as I can, Jonathan. What we do is we create pictures of the future. We call them recognition events. And the trouble with numerical targets is they create unintended consequences. You've only got to look at the pizza company that said they would deliver in 30 minutes or your money back, which resulted in some fairly hair-raising motorbikes around town, along with the bus company that told their drivers to get from A to B in a certain time, and they proceeded to miss out all the stops in the middle just to get to the end. I joke about these two examples, but again and again, it is so difficult to come up with the correct behaviors when you're aiming for a numerical target. Whereas instead, if you've got a picture of where you're aiming, what your business will look like in the future, what it is that you are doing, it's a much better way to focus yourself going forward. And once we get that picture, the example I shared with you before was of a company who couldn't get the right employees in their business. And we created a recognition event where the managing director would walk into his desk on a Monday morning and people would be applying on spec. And what we did from that recognition event, we worked backwards to present day. And as we worked backwards, he said things like, people would have got so excited they felt they had to apply to my company to work. And before that, people in the company or people we're linked to were speaking so highly of our business. And before that, went back and back, and we started making changes. And lo and behold, letters landed on his desk. And this is a second generation business who had never been able to get good employees. But that's just one example of what we do on recognition events.
And that's a good example because it shows us that the typical chase for sales, targets, cash. I've seen so many companies where they've started out and worked for a few companies where they've started out really well with the right ideas, but as soon as the numerical targets become king, they tend to miss out all the stuff that makes those numerical targets worthwhile. I know one company that I worked for when I was in an outbound sales call center, which is horrible to remember, but they started out quite well. But as soon as they started putting, these are the exact targets we want you to meet every day, well, people started changing their behavior every day and realizing when the sales were coming. Then to try and prevent that, they said, we need this number of sales every hour. And anyone who's ever been in sales will tell you that's not how sales work. You can go an hour or a week with none, and then you can go 3 days and get 10. Yeah. There was a focus on the wrong kind of behavior. They were pushing people to make decisions that they shouldn't have been making. And I think that's one of the things that I've noticed with the rise of social media, and this is going to take us to our next question for Judy, but in the rise of social media, I've seen far too many young interpreters push for links, hits, shares, comments, and not really think about, well, okay, I can write an article that gets shared 10,000 times by my fellow interpreters, but the monetary value of that is what? I joked in Budapest that no one ever goes up to their bank and says, my last Facebook post got 10,000 comments. Can I get a mortgage, please? No bank would entertain that. But Judy, kind of moving from that point, the Entrepreneurial Linguist for me is still the industry classic. What has kind of shifted since? Is there anything that's shifted since you and Dagmar wrote the book? And if you were to write a new edition, are there sections that you would take out or new sections that you would put in?
I'm so glad you liked the book. It was a labor of love because, our colleagues kept on telling us they liked our blog posts and we should maybe think about writing a book. And I did it kicking and screaming, I'll be honest. I'm not nearly as good at writing books as you are, Jonathan, but we did it and it was lovely. And I think it's made
in hindsight.
In the middle, it felt like 10 minutes underwater.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
So it's hard to finish it, but I do think it's made really good contributions to the industry. And that's what we wanted. We didn't dedicate the book to our parents. We actually dedicated it to all our colleagues around the world, right? Because we wrote it for everybody. So it really was something we felt strongly about doing. And it's been great to see how well it's been received.
And has anything really changed that if you were to write, Entrepreneurial Linguist version 2, is there anything that you would take out or anything that you would put in, especially what you would put in now?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, we've been getting some friendly email reminders about the second edition and from lovely colleagues who'd like to see more, which is very flattering indeed. But I'm going to tell you, I just don't know if I want to do it again. But as much as I've enjoyed it, it's a big project. It seems so unsurmountable. It seems like such a Herculean task, but clearly it's possible. But to answer your question, there is a lot that has changed, especially on social media. Basically, the entire chapter we wrote on social media would completely need to be redone. This book came out in 2010, which is in the early days of Twitter. And I remember in the book, we actually picked Facebook as our favorite social media, even for business, which doesn't make as much sense now as it did 8 years ago, because things change, and that's just the nature of how the business world works. So that would definitely need some revision for sure. And we'd also want the chapter on interpreting, because it was originally written for translators. Of course, pretty much everything that's presented can be applied in interpreting as well, but we'd probably have a special chapter for interpreting topics that are specific to interpreters, and maybe add an international chapter on taxation for different countries, which is also very intimidating.
Oh boy,
very true.
One of the things that struck me when reading the book, and it's one of the things that I think is missing in a lot of the marketing and business development talk that I've seen all over the internet, is the very humanity of it. I mean, I know you said it was written back in the early days of Twitter, but there's almost been this law of people actually caring about the human being at the end of the email or at the end of the tweet. And I now have a policy that anyone who automated direct messages me on Twitter or sends me an automated message on LinkedIn, I automatically disconnect.
Yeah, I agree.
So I want unfollow or disconnect.
Yeah.
And it's that trying to break down the automation of it all. Thankfully, in your book, it's so human, and there's so much about actually meeting people and who you are, and I think especially for translators who we joke that you've met an extroverted translator when they stare at your shoes while you're speaking.
Yes, I love that one. It's so true. Translators tend to live occasionally solitary existences. Their work lives are pretty solitary, and so I thought we have this background, my twin sister and I, and especially me with having gone to business school. I thought, well, I have some strategies that appear to be working, and what I want more than anything is not necessarily for us to be successful, but I want everybody to be successful. I want to be part of an industry that is full of positive energy, where people can make a good living off it, and that's unfortunately not always the case. So we thought this is our contribution to this is our legacy to the industry, that we share what we know, so hopefully people can apply it and maybe not do exactly what we did, but have some ideas about how to basically get their services sold, because that's what it comes down to. You can be the world's greatest interpreter or translator, but if you don't really know how to find the clients, that's not really a very valuable skill, unless it's very valuable, but it's only valuable in conjunction with clients.
Yeah.
And the big question is, how do you get those clients, right? And so that's what we tried to answer in the book. And I'm glad you like the humanity in it, because I think it was written as a labor of love to our industry, and I'm glad it shows.
I was going to say, Alex Gansmar, is it just an English-speaking thing, or is it this same kind of automation? Send out 1,000 DM, automated DM whoever follows you, and it's becoming quite like machinery here in the UK. I don't know if the same's happening in Germany, and whether because I know you work with Falcade and with AIC. Is there any efforts there to kind of try to slow that process down and say, we're still human beings after all? I've seen it both from interpreters and from people who I would ordinarily like to work with as clients, that you follow them and you instantly get a DM, or you've got like 3,000 messages, and obviously an email that hits your inbox obviously hasn't been customized in any single way.
Yeah. So I think there's two interesting approaches that I've seen more, but two of them I find very interesting. One of them is to present yourself as the absolute expert. So it's really interpreters going into business schools and giving presentations to the future leaders, to the future managers, on how they can help them grow their business potentially in the future, and try to get the clients through that way, and try to present themselves as that beacon of knowledge that can help them out. And I think that's a really interesting approach. The other one I find interesting, but sort of troubling. The other one is really that's exactly what you were talking about, that automation, in a way, that commodification of interpreting. I've seen a lot of people talking about setting up platforms where you can just automatically book interpreters, where they can, this is all voluntary, right? And this is all coming from within the industry, because usually when people come up with these ideas, it's usually from some sort of agency thinks it's a good idea, but these are interpreters coming up with these ideas that they can set up platforms where everybody can log their availability, and then people can just come in and book you automatically, and everything is basically just without any personal contact, because these interpreters think that's what people nowadays like. And oftentimes that's true. That's how you find certain doctors. That's how you find, I don't know, your mechanic or your plumber. And for certain approaches, that really works well. I'm not sure that works for interpreting. I'm not sure I want it to work for my interpreting. But those are the two most intriguing sort of approaches that I've seen in the recent, I don't know, developments in the industry.
And I think that's an interesting point, as I have seen the same two trends, certainly from here. Sadly, I'm seeing more and more of people in their own industry going down I'm going to SEO everything, I'm going to automate everything, I'm going to have a very strict sales funnel. And it concerns me that the very tactics that we criticise certain parts of the industry for doing, 2 years ago, are now becoming the very tactics that we're using. Whether it's because people think that's what's working, whether people think that it's dog eat dog, so we have to start eating bigger dogs. Ewan, I know you've worked with a lot of solopreneurs and one-person businesses. How do you help people get away from this commodification? And you were talking in the show notes, you were talking about direct and indirect marketing. Is there a link between the way that you market your services and the kind of attitude that you have in your head about the services that you're offering?
Yeah, I think you've given me about 3 questions there, Jonathan. let me have a bash at them. The first thing, just for your listeners to clarify, indirect is when you send out communications to everyone and anyone. These are random posts on your social media. These are random letters to organizations, random articles and adverts in magazines. No specific target. Whereas direct marketing is when you have an individual's name. You contact them directly to their phone, directly by mail, directly by messages on social media. And for me, direct marketing is the route that you need to go. However, very few people do it because it's incredibly uncomfortable. So hopefully that's answered one of the first questions for you there. Now, the second bit you were asking was really around how they position themselves. The point Alex was making a minute ago about the automation and commodification, it's not easy in your industry from what I know about your industry. Some industries can do it better than others. And it will happen in every industry. I mean, all the professional services I work with, it's happening in. However, and Alex touched on this as well, you don't want to be one of the people that's going down that road, because it is incredibly tough. It's incredibly competitive. And what I will see happening again and again is the big organizations, they will rule it and prices will be forced down and down and down. The route that you need to go is the other kind of 20% that are going their own way. And what I always encourage them to do is to move to what I call valued partner status rather than just another service provider. I don't know if you've heard that term before.
Yes, some event managers would call it preferred supplier, or it's kind of this move away from being the fifth person on the list to the one that they're trusting with a lot more of the process than just deliver the event.
Yeah, absolutely. And to answer your third question, how you achieve that, how you become that preferred supplier, that valued partner, it's around a couple of things. It's around targeting not just the delivery of your interpretation skills and other services you provide. It's also touching on strategy and reporting. Now, when I mention strategy, delivery, reporting to those I work with, they all kind of hesitate and say, well, either it can't be done in my industry or I'm doing it already. People I've spoken to about this, they can all do it, and most of them are currently paying lip service to it. And how you deal with this and introduce it to a client, and Alex mentioned a minute ago about, you have to be the expert and tell them. I see that as half right. You do need to be the expert, but the way that you tell them is by asking questions, asking quality questions around your interpretation skills in relation to their business needs. And when you start doing that, you help them to connect your services with the value that they are winning. And I know from conversations we've had, Jonathan, you have helped people win huge amounts of money that is worth something.
And I think this is the thing, is there has been, I think both Alex's and Judy will attest to this, there's been a historical hesitancy in interpreting, I think, to talk about what it is that interpreting achieves. We're good at talking about accuracy. We're good at talking about hours worked. We're good at talking about some people are good at talking about where they've worked, but without giving the client away. But there hasn't been a lot of openness in interpreting to say, in my last 2 jobs, I helped clients win deals worth roughly X million euros or X million dollars. Judy, I would have expected that the American market would have actually been ahead of the game and been ready to go to new clients and say, you're a commercial client. I've helped companies in your sector or companies of your size to win contracts worth X million dollars. Is there a move towards doing that in the States, or are people still hanging back and using the same, I'm accurate, I've been to a university line that I think people have been using for about 50 years now?
That's a good question. I don't think we're there yet. I've been trying to sort of push our colleagues to develop really a sense of what makes them different or what sets their services apart, right? And that's a big question. How can I sell something that so many people are good at and that really are hard to differentiate for the client? And one way, of course, to do it is to say exactly what you just said, that through my interpreting or language assistance services, this company has fought off this major lawsuit or he has won this new project in South America or whatever. But I just think the reason we're not doing it is because we're just very shy, I think, as an industry about highlighting our achievements. A lot of it is we're just not very good at marketing. And sometimes people just don't think about that would be interesting. But somebody like me who went to business school, I understand that every time you frame something in a monetary way, it's usually pretty compelling for clients, right? You can say, hey, I can save you X amount of money if you do this, or I can help you win this. As ethnocentric as we are in this country, I think most business people fundamentally understand that the majority of business growth will be outside the United States and outside of the English-speaking market. So you're going to have to bring some linguists in there in the mix somewhere, right? So I think as an industry, we have a long way to go in terms of highlighting those achievements and highlighting our own importance in the global industry. I think so much of the problem is that, and I hate to say this, but this industry is very female driven, and we're just not very good at tooting our own horn sometimes. We go back to the basics. I'm a great interpreter. I'm very accurate. I'm like, yeah, but that's like saying, hey, I have a restaurant, the food's good. You're like, yeah, right? I mean, that's kind of a minimum expectation, right? So there's some work to do.
I was going to say that now it's like to sell a used car by saying, look, it's got an engine in the front. I mean, it really doesn't say much.
I was going to say, Jonathan, can I jump in briefly?
Yeah, of course.
Just a point there. Really good points, Judy. It was interesting to hear you talking about, everyone who's listening to the show that are shy and they don't feel they're good at, asking questions and selling. Well, I work with graphic designers and IT support people and SEO people. These people have got no communication skills. They are techies. Could I just say that everyone listening to this show, if you think I'm not good, I'm a little bit shy, I don't know how to sell, could I just say you are miles ahead of all those techie people? You are good.
This is the thing is we all know. I mean, I've met some of those graphic design and techie people. We really are miles ahead. But there is something about in interpreters. We are communication experts. And yet, and I say this knowing that I will get some emails back, our external communications are, what's the polite word? Rubbish. I think is the only word for it. Alex, you do a lot of work with associations. Have there been any moves with IEC and FALCA to redress this lack of even good interpreting PR? We had a really good move recently with interpreters in war zones. But has anyone taken those lessons into promoting the services of interpreters in the commercial and legal world?
There have definitely been some strides in the PR kind of realm, but I think that's, again, an underlying discussion for the associations as to what they want to be. Do they want to be job platforms, or do they want to be sort of a seal of quality? And I think there's kind of two camps, and it's roughly 50-50 in terms of the membership. And one half wants it to be a job platform, and the other half wants it to be just like, I'm here, I'm part of this association or organization, which stands for quality, which stands for a certain code of conduct. And as long as they're that as long as there's a divide, you can't really satisfy everyone. I'm personally not thinking that these associations are job platforms, because I'm thinking, this is my business. I need to make sure that my own business is running. I can't just pay, I don't know, 500 euros to an association and expect them to do the work for me. That's not what I'm thinking. They can give me the tools by providing, I don't know, business workshops or some sort of CPD to improve my business, but then the rest is up to me.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, and I think that's sometimes very hard to communicate in our industry, and I don't know if I really don't know what it is, but you were saying that the techie people don't really, or sometimes can't really sell themselves because they don't really have the communication skills that we have. But the thing is, the outside world looks at the techie people, the graphic designers, the website people, the IT folks, and they see cold, hard knowledge that they have, these IT people, that nobody else has. If you show me a line of code, I might be able to decipher that there is a colon and a bracket in there somewhere, but that's pretty much it. And if somebody looks at us, they're thinking, oh yeah, you know what? I speak a little bit of French. Why would I be paying you X amount of money if, I can do that too? Like, I'm pretty much almost as good as you are. So why would I be paying you this much? Whereas if you look at the code of a website, you're like, holy cow, please take this thing away from me and I'll pay you whatever you want. So I think it's really about us as an industry charging what we're worth. Yeah. And as long as there's people who don't charge that, that's what makes it difficult for the rest of us who do want to charge that. So I think a lot of the issue is that some people just try, or not, they don't try, they simply sell themselves short.
Yes,
also
absolutely.
In terms of financial, monetary value.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add one point here, which is also related to the associations. As far as I can tell, not all associations have actually understood that PR and marketing is a serious profession, and not all associations have hired professionals to help them with that. Because, of course, unless you have someone who is actually a PR professional or a marketing professional who can do it as a volunteer in the association, you need a professional, an agency, some kind of support for doing that if you're serious about it. And not all associations do that, which I think is unfortunate.
I mean, this is what I was going to say. There's a third way between being a job board and being a seal of quality, and that is I have to here wave my ITI flag. ITI's motto is promoting the highest standards in the profession. Not so much saying, we're selling our member services, but promoting the profession itself.
Right.
Doing PR for the profession, saying this is what interpreters do, this is the difference we make. You mentioned about this difficulty with techies, and I like Alex's point that there is a kind of underlying understanding that they have knowledge that people need. But I've spoken to graphic designers who are quite concerned about the rise of things like Fiverr and all of these Odesk and whatever they're called, these platforms where people can get what looks like a professional product for ridiculously low amounts of money. Is there ways that you work with these solopreneurs to enable them to almost make that competition irrelevant?
Yeah, great question. I mentioned previously, it's about asking those quality questions. And, when someone says to you, oh, I speak French, I think I could do my own interpreting, you need to come up with 2 or 3 questions that categorically shows to them they cannot do their own interpreting. Asking them, what if someone was to put this word instead of that word? Do you know what the impact of that might be? To ask them if someone was to get the context, or, if you've got a series of questions that holds up a mirror to them and helps them to see that actually their pidgin French is not going to cut a £30 million deal.
And I think this is, again, one of the fundamental issues is that I don't think we're used to asking questions. I think traditionally the role of the interpreter has been to come with the answers, not necessarily to ask the questions. And I was going to turn this to Judy. One of the things that there have been discussions about, certainly some discussions that I've been involved in, is I remember talking to someone about, I'm realizing that I have to own the process, not just the end result, the interpreting, I turn up at 9 o'clock on Monday, but take ownership over the process of how interpreting works for that organization. And what I got back from a couple of colleagues was, well, that's not interpreting, that's not our job. Do you deal with the same thing in the US, where a lot of interpreters would say that's not my job, I just turn up. And if so, how do you overcome, if you like, those internal objections?
Very good question. Here in the US, conference interpreting really is still in its infancy compared to what it is in Europe, especially on the West Coast here, where there are no major international organizations and no United Nations building, no permanent booths. So there's a completely different level of expectation, I think, from everybody, right? Even here in Las Vegas, which is by all accounts and purposes one of the biggest convention cities in the world. But there is not one hotel, not one conference room in this entire city of more than 100,000 rooms that has a permanent interpreting booth, right? So I think the exposure that clients have to interpreting is very, very limited. So we have to do a lot of educational work. We have to explain to them that, no, we can't just sit in the back of your room at a folding table and interpret into mobile equipment, which I actually get asked that all the time. So we've got a lot more work to do than you guys have over in Europe, for sure. But also, I think the fact that the industry is more in its infancy, so to say, here also makes it challenging for linguists to really demand what they need in terms of working conditions. And we have the issue with, like Alexander Gansmeyer was saying, about lower rates and people constantly undercutting each other because they love conference interpreting so much, and it's a huge thrill, right? So everybody wants to do it because it's more exciting than conference and than community or legal. So I see that. But I think in general, yes, I would say that I have noticed a tendency that some colleagues, they do want the professional glory and they want the acceptance of being a really well-paid professional, but they're not willing to do their part. I always tell them it comes both ways, right? You don't get clients to respect you just because that's what you want, right? You also got to be involved in the process. You have to go above and beyond the minimum requirement. And for me, the minimum requirement is showing up at 9 o'clock, well prepared, and turning on the mic. But there's much more than that. And I think it's not that they don't want to do it. I think they just haven't thought about it. They haven't really seen themselves as an important part of the conference or of the international strategy of the client. I mean, for me, it's simple things like checking in with a client. Hey, you coming to Vegas? Here's my five favorite restaurants for you that are within a mile of your hotel. Enjoy, or something like that.
But I love what you said, Judy, and I think it's really just not showing up and at 9 o'clock and turning on the microphone. I think it's much more, but I don't think that a lot of interpreters have realized that. I've had these conversations, especially with more experienced interpreters who, came up back in the golden days when interpreters were, super rare. They had been flown out all around the globe, first class.
Oh, nice.
But those people never had to do these things. So whenever I'm at a large event, I've organized 10 booths, I'm at a large event, I do speak to the client on equal footing, because if I'm there, if I'm providing 10 languages so that thousands of people in the venue can understand what's going on, I'm just as crucial to the success of the event as the director, as the lighting technician, as the catering guy. And I think you need to kind of represent yourself in that reassured way. Not stand there like, oh, just the interpreters. We don't want to interfere. We don't want to bother you. Oh, please don't even look at us. Why are we here? And, I'm just kind of standing there. I think it's a very fine line that you have to straddle, though, because you don't want to be throwing yourself at the client. I'm sure they're busy because it's a conference with thousands of people. So they don't want to talk to you necessarily. Maybe they don't have the time to talk to you. But try to be present. I try to be present. I try to talk to them on equal footing, just making sure that they see me, that they see what I'm doing, that I'm here, and that I see what they're doing, that I get what they're doing, and that we're all kind of like in the same struggle.
And we have to be visible. I think this term of invisible interpreter, I've never really gotten the whole invisible interpreter concept. I don't think that's a very good one for our industry, for our profession. I think we need to get rid of this whole invisible interpreter. I don't know who the invisible interpreters are. I haven't met any of them.
I haven't met any of them either, but I could have just not seen them. Ewan, could you give us a few words before we move on to a slightly different topic? But can you give us a few words on removing this word "just"? Every one-person business, every solopreneur, every consultant that I've met who's not yet earning, £1,000 a day or whatever, they all seem to be addicted to this word "just."
You just read my mind. I was going to say the exact same thing.
Yeah. Could you give us your battle-worn tips of how to destroy that word for us, please?
Well,
yes, please do.
Let me share a story which I'm sure a few of you will have heard before. One day, Picasso was in the park, sketching, drawing, painting, and a lady came over to him and said, "It's you, Picasso. Please, would you draw a sketch of me?" So Picasso said to the lady, "Of course I shall." And she sat down for him, and with almost one stroke of his pen, he encaptured everything about that lady's character. And he handed the sketch over to the lady. It took him about 10 seconds. And he said to her, "Madam, that will be 5,000 francs. And she said, "It just took you 10 seconds. And he said, "No, madam, it has taken me all my life."
Yep.
Yeah.
And I mean, I look at all these interpreters you're speaking about. You haven't just learned to speak a language or multiple languages overnight. This has taken you decades. It's taken you probably 10,000 hours of study. It has cost you money and God knows what else. You are worth it. You are worthy. Please charge more.
And this is the thing, is that we have, I promised the guys that I will try not to mention my book anymore, but the first chapter of my first book, I mentioned this thing about moving away from this "we're a neutral conduit, we don't make a difference" thing to actually partnering with clients. It is still to this day the most controversial thing that I've ever written, because I think all of the interpreters in this room will realize the pressure on interpreters, especially if you were trained more than about 10 years ago, this massive pressure to not, almost like, it's like the day when I was interpreting in the control room of a nuclear power plant, and the first words they told me were, "Don't touch anything." And I think interpreters have got this mentality of, don't touch anything, don't make a difference. Some of the things that seem like brand new virgin territory for interpreting, this whole value creation, talking about the difference that we make is quite new for the industry. But for the wider world of business, it's been fundamental for I don't know how long. Just quickly, because I'm realizing that we need to start moving towards something that looks like a conclusion. Ewan, could you give us some example of monetary value for some interpreters? For instance, if they work in court or in hospitals. In court, for example, they don't really want to talk about, we made X amount of money for so and so. For them, it's about, was justice served? They have a different set of business aims in mind, if you see my meaning. Could you give us some examples of non-monetary ways of seeing value creation that you've walked through with consultants, so that they've got kind of a whole battery of things that they can say to clients? Especially I know you get non-profits that aren't particularly monetary driven, but there's a whole sector dedicated to them. So what are some non-monetary kind of value creation that businesses can talk about?
There's a two-prong approach here. The first one is about developing confidence in you, the interpreter. And the second one is about developing confidence in the client that you're speaking to. And both are equally important. And the way to do that is, I'm coming back to these questions again. When you sit down and you start asking questions, it opens the other person's eyes. But in the same breath, as they answer those questions and they tell you whether they're in court or it's a business or a charity, when they're answering those questions and they're telling you the context of your interpretation work is in relation to helping 1,000 employees to achieve something, or whether it's about introducing a new product to the market, when you can see the value and when they can see the value, both of you will have much more confidence going forward. Now, as you go through a sales process with them, don't immediately go to the point where you say, "Okay, I'll drop you an invoice and then we'll get things underway." Instead of doing that, prepare a proposal, prepare a presentation, and build that proposal or build that presentation around everything they have just told you by answering your questions. So in doing so, they're selling themselves on the things that they need and the things that will make an impact in their organization. That's
a great way of seeing it. And again, it's not something that I think a lot of interpreters are used to. Judy, what sort of approaches have you been using to help clients appreciate your value, especially when you have a market very much like ours here in the UK, where the price points for interpreting vary almost unbelievably widely, and so to get to the upper end of those price points, there's something extra that has to be added. What kind of approaches have you been using to, like Ewan was saying, to help clients see the value in what you do?
I work as an interpreter pretty much every day, but the vast majority of my work is in court interpreting. I do conference interpreting as well, but as you know, the market here for conference interpreting simply isn't big enough to work only as a conference interpreter. And unfortunately, on the conference interpreting side, we have the aforementioned problem that many colleagues, all of whom I like and respect very deeply, but have made some mistakes in terms of pricing. So I have, for certain conferences, completely priced myself out of the market, and I feel very happy with that strategy. I wish that other colleagues would follow suit and insist a little bit more on professional rates. But on the court interpreting side, there is a way to obviously set yourself apart, and that's usually done via one of the ways is via certifications. Here in the US, we have a certification for court interpreting for several languages, my main language being Spanish, and there's a federal certification, which what we sometimes call the major leagues of court interpreting. And there are only a few federally certified interpreters usually per state, especially the smaller states. Nevada is not small, but it's small in population. So there's about 5 of us. So that is the main distinguishing characteristic that I have, that I'm technically on paper more qualified. I have a higher certification. So that's one. I mean, I think in court interpreting, that really is a big differentiator. And the other part is I actually go out of my way to make my clients happy. I show up at their boring networking events. I work mostly with lawyers, as you'd imagine, lots of lawyers. So I go to their events. I volunteer to give free education sessions on how to work with an interpreter. I wrote an article for their law magazine saying, here's 5 ways to save money while working with an interpreter. And I'm never saying don't pay them what they're worth. I'm just saying you can reduce the time we spend on this if you do these and these things. So I think I've done a relatively good job at making sure that they know that I care about the success of their business as well, because, my success and theirs are pretty tied together, right? Even as a court interpreter, of course, you're completely neutral in the outcome, but I want to successfully establish communication, and I want them to feel that if they need over the phone interpreting, as subpar as that is for me as an interpreter, but if they have their client on the line and he's in a jail somewhere far away and they need to talk to him, I'm going to drop everything, even if I'm in the car, and I'm going to take out my notebook and I'm going to take consecutive notes and I'll interpret that as best I can, if I have to. I solved the problem, right? It wasn't good for me as an interpreter, but I solved the problem for the client. Flying to Texas is an option.
I think so too. I completely agree. I feel like, Judy, you're just setting me up for these great things, and I completely agree with everything you say all the time. So it's really good, because I do agree. Oftentimes, you just kind of have to step back as an interpreter and say, okay, this is less than ideal. This is not exactly how it's supposed to go in interpreting, but this is what the situation requires. This is what the client requires at the moment. And if you're helping them out in a bind, they're going to remember that, and they're going to be more loyal because you help them out in a subpar situation. If you're pulling up on the side of the road, if you're getting out your notes, if you're doing that telephone interpreting or whatever it may be, they're going to remember that, and they're going to come back to you next time because you've helped them out. And I think that's something that's a big point of mine, that we all have to realize that in our very innate self-concept as interpreters, we're not just people with languages, we're business people on equal footing with the other people, with the other business people. And
Yep.
Yeah, just behave in that way,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think they remember you. I totally agree that actually just happened to me last week. My dad was visiting from Europe for a month, and I tried to spend as much time with him as possible. And last week we're on the way to lunch, very casually dressed, and this client calls and says, "Oh my God, I'm supposed to have an interpreter for this interview for court, and if I don't do it today, then the judge is gonna bite my head off because it's completely my fault. I have everything done except for the interpreter. Can you come in right now?" I said, well, right now I'm not dressed professional. And he said, "I don't care." I said, "I'm actually on my way to lunch with my dad." He's like, "Bring your dad. I don't care." So we went over there, and he said, "You just saved my life. This judge was absolutely going to bite my head off if I didn't have this done by tomorrow." And I said, "Hey, I like saving your life. That's great. Everybody's happy. I saved your life. I can go to lunch later." I did. That was
exactly. Get some pocket change too.
Exactly.
I think that's the thing. I mean, I remember in early December, I got a strange email while I was in the middle of a trade show from an organization I'd never heard of saying, "Can you come and interpret in Paris on Friday?"
Wow.
And I was thinking, is this one of these really weird kind of crying, because there are so many scams going through. And I tried to put them off, and I was like, I'm at a trade show, and they wanted me to call. I'm like, "I'm really sorry, I'm at a trade show, can't call you just now. I'm quite happy to recommend colleagues in France." And literally Thursday morning, so it was the Wednesday, Thursday morning, I get home, I'm minding my own business. I think we just not long finished breakfast or something, and I get this call from a French number on my phone. And I mean, at 9 o'clock in the morning, sometimes trying to find good business French is not easy. And they were kind of super desperate. And so they flew me on Friday, very early Friday morning, out to France, into Paris. And then I got a train somewhere I'm not allowed to say. And by like 7 o'clock at night, I was interpreting at a business meeting worth an enormous amount of money. And then I ended up interpreting until about 11 p.m. to the point where I couldn't eat properly because I was so fatigued. My stomach was in knots. And I felt horrible because everyone who's done business interpreting knows that the meal after the meeting is as important as the meeting itself.
Right.
And the real work happens when they're munching on their whatever food. It doesn't happen in the negotiating room, which is like a tip I want to give people who ever do negotiation. The real business happens when you're eating. Literally just as dessert got there, it was like a 7-course fabulous French meal, and I got by course 3, I felt like I was about to see course 1 again. And it just, but it's one of these things, you do that because it was a recommendation from a colleague of a colleague, and you do that because you don't leave people in a bind if you can possibly manage it.
Exactly.
And I don't usually do urgent interpreting because your prep time just goes nowhere. And if one of the things, I've got currently an 6-week email course available for people looking to buy interpreting more intelligently. And one of the things that I say is, for goodness sake, give interpreters time to prep. We're good, but we're not that good that we can come in without prep. We're really good, but yeah, give us prep and you'll get a better result. But that job those things happen. And we're moving towards the end now, but one of the useful tools which I'm looking to pick up on myself is Ewan has a course which everyone who I've talked to that's been on the course has said what a great course it is. Can you talk us through, Ewan, what your course is about? We'll put a link to it in the show notes. What your course is about, who it's for, and what kind of things people will learn from the course.
Yeah, sure, Jonathan. The first thing, who it's for, are professional service providers, not just interpreters. It's those ITs and techies and SEOs, also HR people. That's who it's for. What it does, very simply, it helps you to move to a position where you can double your prices. And what that allows you to do is start scaling your business or reducing your hours, which most people seem to like. The course came about. The course came about a few years back. I noticed that the clients I'm working with, they were all the same. They were small businesses, or they were sole traders, certainly less than 5 people, and they were all in the same difficult problem. They were working too long hours. They were getting underpaid, and I thought, I need a solution for them. Initially, that solution was 2 years. Until one of them said to me, "Ewan, I'm sure you could teach this in 2 months." So the course is now 2 months.
And it's incredible because the shape of most courses nowadays is 3 webinars and a pamphlet. I don't know if people have noticed this trend that someone calls it a course if they've recorded 3 15-minute videos on a beach somewhere and they've got a 1-page PDF. I've looked at the contents of Ewan's course and there's a lot of stuff there. There's a lot of one-to-one work there at different price points as well. We'll put it in the show notes and people can have a look. I have a feeling you're going to get a lot of sign-ups because as soon as you said double your fees, my eyes just got bigger. And also I've reduced from 1st of December last year, I went down to a 4-day work week almost every week. I've broken it once this year so far. That's because I didn't have a choice because of when things landed. And oddly, and I cannot yet explain this, since I've gone to a 4-day working week, my monthly revenue has gone up.
That's fantastic.
And I checked this, and so what I was doing is I was comparing the months this year against average months and against the maximum month. And every month is above average. And 1 month, there was a 30-day period where I earned more in 30 days than I had ever earned in any 30-day period in my entire career.
Wow.
And that's going to afford. It wasn't an exact month, so it didn't look great on my charts and stuff. But I saw this, and I looked at the last time that I earned. I think it's about 10% less. Well, it's about 20% less than that because of exchange rates. And I counted up roughly how many hours I was working, and I realized the last time I got close to that figure, I worked 3 consecutive weeks of 60 weeks, 10 hours most days. This time, I was doing 4-day weeks, 6 to 7.5 hours a day, with the exception of that French job. And that made me realize that actually the conventional, I've seen so many translators and interpreters say things like, you have to work when the work comes in, or, I don't have time to go to conferences because what if a job comes in? I think that entire attitude, we could do an entire podcast series on attitudes, but this attitude of I'm a slave to when the work comes in, I would like to free us from that, because as Ewan's been talking about, there are things that we can do that we can even out this feast and famine. There are things that we can do that we're adding value to clients all through the process. There are ways that we can kind of work towards having more ideal clients. Those things are doable. And I think most of it, certainly from my point of view, the biggest shift that I've seen in the past 18 months is my attitude to my own work. Slap a consultant title in front of my name and suddenly I see myself differently and I market myself differently. So it's a lesson, and it's moving into, we're going to look to wrap up here so that Alex Drexel doesn't have too much editing to do to get it down to size. And we're going to ask everyone, and I'm going to start with Alexander Drexel first. Just because he's actually done an incredible amount of stuff on using tablets and using tech, and you've done an incredible amount on making interpreting accessible to the outside world and talking to outside experts. So moving from the person who thinks he's going to have least to say all the way through to, I think we'll finish off with Judy and then Ewan. If there was one thing that you were to say to an interpreter that they have to do today, what would it be? Start with Alex.
Can I just be the contrarian and say, please do not start a blog, please do not start a podcast, just for marketing. That's it.
There you go. That's the thing not to do. Okay, Alex Gansmeyer, if you were to tell an interpreter to do something right now, what would it be?
Listen to our podcast.
Bravo.
I know. So I just had to plug ourselves. No, I think you just need to move away from I'm just a little itty-bitty interpreter providing an itty-bitty service for this huge conference. You're a valuable part, and you need to be presenting yourself as an equal to your business partners, because that's what you are, your partners. So I think that's just a shift in mindset.
Okay, and Judy, what would you say that interpreters have to start doing right now?
Alexander totally mentioned exactly it.
Judy!
You're killing me. Let me expand on it, and totally agree that you have to see yourself as an entrepreneur, which is what I've been saying for a long time, and I think it's kind of taking hold in our profession. And maybe the second thing is to learn to love technology, or to at least work with it and live with it and understand that technology is going to influence our profession, whether you like it or not, whether you're against it or for it. You have to understand that it's coming. And instead of sticking your head in the sand and saying, I don't want it, I don't get it, you're going to become obsolete. I think you need to find a way to work with technology. And not all technology is good. And we've all talked a lot about remote interpreting and simul remote. And there's a lot of new things coming up. But you need to learn to love technology, to learn to live with it. And that's what I tell my students too. I mean, I teach interpreting and I give students simple time I have to do for creating a video on speech pool so others can practice interpreting with your video, and you'd be surprised the amount of opposition I get to. It's like I'm going to stand on their head, but I'm just asking them to make a video. But there's all these there's incredible opposition to technology, which is pretty dumbfounding to me. Making a video seems like a pretty basic thing, and interpreters work with technology all the time, so deal with it. Suck it up. There's no crying in interpreting.
No crying in interpreting. There's no crying. By the way, Judy, do you have anything to plug as well? Maybe a new book or anything that we should know about?
No, I really don't. Your podcast is amazing. I think there are a lot of great blogs out there. Maybe the market is a bit saturated at this point. Yeah, I think there's still too many blogs these days than there were maybe 15 years ago or even 10 years ago. So I don't have anything to plug except for, maybe I'm teaching a course through the ITI. There's an ITI course, Advancing Your Freelance Career, and I'm one of the tutors in that class, which I think has been a great effort that ITI has made. It is a few webinars and a pamphlet, but it's actually more than a few webinars and a pamphlet.
Oh, no. You have no idea how much
it's a good course. Check it out.
You have no idea how much our professional development officer is about to hit me when I get to the next board meeting. Ewan, let's move us back to some sanity. If you were to say to an interpreter who wants to, say, double their fees by the end of this year, what would be the one thing that you would say to them you have to do right now?
Yeah, well, could I just tell everyone that's listening, you are stronger than you seem, braver than you believe, and smarter than you think. Raise your prices tomorrow by at least 5 to 10%. And I'll guarantee you, no one will grudge it. They will all pay it. On the very, very few exceptions where people have said, I'm not paying that, it is always the one client that they wanted to fire anyway.
And I'm going to end with, as someone who in the past 18 months has seen his agency, just my agency prices have gone up by a percentage figure that I'm not going to say on the podcast, but they've gone up considerably in the past 18 months since I graduated. I would say to every interpreter, the one thing that you must do tomorrow is commit that you will spend 50% of your in-person networking time away from other interpreters. The reason why I say that is I now go to client events as a matter of course. I love translation and interpreting conferences. Chababan, who runs the BP series of conferences, is an absolute genius. The man deserves a knighthood. There are some wonderful conferences out there. ITI do great conferences. Lots of people do great conferences. But no one ever increased their fees massively by getting a new client by getting another translator or interpreter as a client. Referrals are great. If we really want to grow the industry, if we really want to grow our fees, if we really want to get out of feast or famine, we have to, as I'm going to say in Vienna in April, get off our butts. So the one thing that I would say to interpreters is look at your conference budget, look at your CPD budget, and dedicate half of that budget to events where you would imagine there will not be another interpreter there. It's silly. I went to an event. I go to event management trade shows every year. The first time I went to one, the second thing that someone said to me was, "That's odd. We don't see any of you. We've never seen any of your type here before, yet we hire you all the time." And to me, that was the most insightful but saddest thing that I could hear at an event with 1,400 potential interpreting buyers every single day.
Wow.
And so I think the future belongs to the interpreters who are brave enough to get off of our bottoms and spend 50% of your time outside the industry. It's going to make a big difference. It's going to change the industry. We're not going to raise our rates doing what we're currently doing. We need to do something new. So I think with that, I think it's goodbye from me, and I'll let everyone say goodbye themselves. So Alexis, whichever one first, do you want to say goodbye?
Goodbye.
Bye. And Ewan and Judy, do you want to say a semi-coordinated goodbye?
Goodbye.
Bye.
This was lovely. Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
It was great to have you.
It was great.
It went a lot better than I thought it would. The future belongs to the interpreters who are brave enough to get off of our bottoms and, as they say in the film business, that's a wrap.